It's almost midnight, the house is quiet, everyone else is asleep, and that's exactly when your brain decides to come alive. Suddenly you're writing the paragraph that's been stuck in your head for 3 days. You're sketching an idea you couldn't find at noon. You're humming a melody that seems to write itself. And somewhere in the back of your mind, a question forms, why does my brain work like this? Why am I more creative right now, late at night, than I was all day? Stick with me, because the answer involves your prefrontal cortex, your circadian rhythm. A 2011 psychology experiment involving light bulbs, and the reason almost every famous writer in history kept terrible sleep schedules. This isn't just a feeling you're imagining because you like the aesthetic of a desk lamp and a cup of tea at midnight. It's a documented psychological phenomenon. Researchers actually have a term for it, non-optimal time of day effects on cognition. It sounds counterintuitive. How could working when you're not at your cognitive peak make you more creative? But that's precisely the twist. Multiple studies, including one widely cited piece of research from psychologists Mareike Veith and Rose Zaks, found that people solved insight-based problems, the kind that need a creative leap rather than step-by-step logic, better during their non-optimal hours. In plain English, if you're a morning person, your creative peak might come at night. If you're a night owl, it might actually hit in the morning. The common thread isn't the clock time. It's what happens to your brain when it's a little tired, a little unguarded, and not running at full analytical capacity, because it flips the usual productivity narrative on its head. We're told peak performance means being sharp, alert, caffeinated, and focused. But creativity, it turns out, sometimes prefers the opposite. To understand why, we need to talk about the part of your brain acting as the office manager of your thoughts, the prefrontal cortex. This region is responsible for executive function, planning, self-control, filtering out irrelevant information, and telling you, no, that idea is stupid, don't say it out loud. It's incredibly useful. It's also, according to sleep researchers, one of the first regions to show reduced activity when you're tired or your circadian rhythm dips into a low period. When the prefrontal cortex's grip loosens, something interesting happens. The brain's internal editor, the part that filters, judges, and shuts down weird or irrelevant associations, gets quieter. And when the editor is quiet, more raw material gets through. Psychologists sometimes describe this as reduced latent inhibition. A fancy way of saying your brain stops filtering out stimuli and ideas that it would normally consider irrelevant. In small, healthy doses, this is a creative advantage. It's why a stray thought about your grocery list can somehow connect to the plot hole in your screenplay. Your brain, at night, is simply less picky about which ideas are allowed into the room. This is also part of why so many people report their best ideas arriving in weird, in-between states. During a shower, right before falling asleep, or late at night after a long day. All of these share one thing: lowered cognitive control. Now let's zoom out and talk about your circadian rhythm, your internal 24-hour clock that regulates hormone release, body temperature, alertness, and yes, even flavors of thinking. For most people, alertness and analytical sharpness peak in the late morning, dip after lunch, hello afternoon slump, and then experience what's sometimes called a second wind in the evening before winding down towards sleep. But that evening window isn't just a random energy spike. Body temperature is dropping, melatonin is beginning to rise, and the brain is transitioning out of its most rigid task-focused state. That transition period seems to be a sweet spot for a specific kind of thinking, divergent thinking. This is the type of cognition responsible for brainstorming, unusual connections, artistic ideas, and creative problem solving, as opposed to convergent thinking, which is about narrowing down to one correct logical answer. Convergent thinking wants quiet, focus, and clarity. That's why it thrives in the morning for most people. Divergent thinking, on the other hand, seems to enjoy a bit of mental fog. It likes loose associations. It likes when your brain is a little tired and a little more willing to wander. So when night falls and your body starts preparing for sleep, you're not becoming a worse thinker. You're becoming a different kind of thinker, one better suited for imagination than for math homework. Here's where it gets even stranger, and where that light bulb experiment I mentioned earlier comes in. In a study published in the Journal of Environmental Psychology, Researchers Anna Steidl and Lioba Werth investigated whether darkness itself, not just tiredness, not just time of day, could influence creative output. They ran experiments where participants completed creative tasks under different lighting conditions, brightly lit rooms versus dim ones. The result, people in dimmer lighting scored higher on tasks requiring creative insight and unconventional thinking. The theory behind this is fascinating. Darkness appears to trigger a subtle psychological sense of freedom, what researchers call a feeling of being unobserved or unconstrained. Bright light, on the other hand, tends to increase feelings of being watched, exposed, and judged, which nudges the brain toward caution and conformity. Think about that. The dim glow of a desk lamp at night isn't just cozy. It might be quietly telling your brain nobody's watching. You can take risks here. And creativity, more than almost any other mental skill, requires the willingness to take a risk on a bad idea in order to eventually find a good one. This is likely part of why so many people feel emotionally safer being vulnerable, honest, or experimental late at night. It's not a coincidence that deep conversations, journaling, and creative breakthroughs cluster in these low-light hours. Darkness lowers the social alarm system just enough to let unusual thoughts through. There's a much simpler, less neuroscientific reason nighttime feels more creative too. The world finally shuts up. During the day, your brain is constantly context switching, replying to messages, reacting to conversations, managing tasks, absorbing a non-stop stream of information. Every one of those interruptions taxes what's called your cognitive load, basically your brain's limited working memory capacity. Creativity requires something psychologists call incubation time, space for ideas to sit, connect, and marinate without interruption. During the day, that incubation almost never gets a real chance to happen because something is always pulling your attention away before an idea can fully form. At night, the emails stop. The group chats go quiet. Nobody's expecting an immediate reply. Your mental bandwidth, for the first time all day, actually belongs to you. And in that open space, your brain finally gets to do the slow, wandering, associative work that creativity depends on. It's not magic, it's math. Less input competing for the same mental workspace means more capacity for original thought to actually surface and get noticed. There's another player in this story, mind wandering, that state where your thoughts drift without a specific goal. Neuroscientists have identified something called the default mode network, a set of brain regions that activates when you're not focused on an external task, daydreaming, staring out a window, lying in bed with your mind drifting. For a long time, this network was dismissed as the brain doing nothing. But research over the past 2 decades has shown the opposite. The default mode network is deeply involved in creative incubation, memory consolidation, and, crucially, connecting distant, unrelated ideas. At night, especially as you wind down, your brain naturally shifts more time toward this default mode state. You're not actively problem solving, you're not consuming new information. You're simply existing in your own head, and that's precisely the condition under which the brain tends to shuffle old memories and ideas together in new, sometimes brilliant combinations. This is why so many people report their best ideas arriving right before sleep, a state sometimes nicknamed the hypnagogic state, the transitional zone between wakefulness and sleep. Salvador Dali famously used this state deliberately, holding a spoon over a metal plate as he drifted off so that the clatter of it hitting the floor would wake him the instant he entered this creative in-between zone, letting him capture the strange, associative imagery his brain produced there. You don't need a spoon trick to benefit from this. Simply allowing yourself unstructured, screen-free time before bed gives your default mode network room to work, and that's often where the night's best ideas actually come from. It's not a coincidence that so much of the world's creative output has historically been produced at night. Countless writers, composers, and artists throughout history have described working through the late hours, often citing the quiet and the shift in mental state as essential to their process. Some of this is cultural. Night has long been romanticized as the domain of artists, poets, and philosophers, which creates a kind of self-fulfilling expectation, but some of it lines up precisely with what we now understand scientifically. Reduced inhibition, quieter surroundings, a wandering mind, and dimmer light all stack together at night to create near-perfect creative conditions. It's the combination that matters. No single factor fully explains the night creativity effect. It's the layering of a slightly tired prefrontal cortex, a circadian dip favouring divergent thought, dim lighting reducing self-consciousness, fewer external distractions, and a default mode network free to wander. Put all 5 of those together and it's almost strange that we wouldn't feel more creative at night. Now, before this turns into an excuse to pull all-nighters, a word of caution. The same research that shows creative benefits from being slightly tired also shows a very real cost. Chronic sleep deprivation devastates memory consolidation, emotional regulation, and long-term cognitive health. There's a meaningful difference between naturally staying up a bit later while your mind is open and associative and routinely wrecking your sleep schedule in pursuit of inspiration. The creative boost researchers observed came from working during a person's natural non-optimal window, not from extreme sleep deprivation. If you're chronically exhausted, the loosened mental filter doesn't produce more good ideas. It just produces more noise, more distractibility, and worse decision-making the next day. So the goal isn't to sleep less. The goal is understanding your own rhythm, recognizing when your mind naturally loosens its grip and using that window intentionally while still protecting your overall sleep health. So how do you actually use all of this? First, protect your natural creative window. If you consistently notice a burst of inspiration at a certain hour, whether that's 9 p.m. or 6 a.m., treat that time as sacred for creative work rather than admin tasks or emails. Second, dim the lights on purpose. If you're brainstorming, journaling, or working through a creative block, try lowering the lighting in your space rather than working under harsh overhead light. It's a small environmental hack backed by real psychological research. Third, remove the interruptions. Put the phone in another room. Close the tabs. The value of night isn't really about the darkness alone, it's about the silence that comes with it. You can recreate a version of that silence at any hour if you're intentional about it. Fourth, capture ideas the moment they appear. Since so much of this creativity comes from a fleeting, half-awake mental state, keep a notebook or voice memo app within reach. Ideas from this state evaporate quickly once full alertness returns. Fifth, respect the boundary between night owl creativity and sleep deprivation. Use your natural late window if that's where your mind opens up. But don't chase the effect by staying up later and later. The benefit comes from timing, not exhaustion. So the next time midnight rolls around and your brain suddenly wants to write, sketch, compose, or dream up something new, you'll know exactly why. It's not random. It's your prefrontal cortex easing its grip, your circadian rhythm shifting toward divergent thought, the dim light quietly telling your brain no one's watching. The world finally falling silent and your default mode network taking the wheel to wander somewhere your daytime mind never would have gone. Night doesn't make you a different person. It just makes you a less filtered one. And sometimes that's exactly what creativity needs. If this helped you understand your own creative patterns a little better, let me know in the comments what time of day your best ideas tend to show up. And if you want more videos digging into the science behind how your brain actually works, make sure you're subscribed because we've only just scratched the surface.